Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the knee-jerk reflex. Yesterday, I went to the doctor and they hit my knee to check something. Has that ever happened to you? Well, my friend Sarah is going to the doctor today and she said we could look in to learn more about this test and the knee-jerk reflex. Let's see what she's up to. This is Sarah. She's here at the doctor's office for her checkup. The doctor's going to do tests and take measurements from her to make sure she's healthy. During those tests, she's going to check Sarah's reflexes. Let's watch to see more. Looks like the nurse is calling Sarah. Let's follow her. Here the doctor's about to check her reflexes. But what is a reflex? Where do they come from? And how do they work? Well, we've known about reflexes for a long time, but it's only recently that scientists have been able to learn why they happen and how they happen. People used to think that animal spirits controlled reflexes, but a man named Wilhelm Erb showed us why they really work. People have known for a long time that when you hit someone's knee with a hammer, your knee pops up. This is called the knee-jerk reflex. In 1870, Wilhelm Erb found that it could be useful in medicine and told other scientists to use it in the doctor's office in 1875. So when the doctor taps your knee, remember, you have Wilhelm Erb to thank. Before Wilhelm, people knew about the reflex, but had no idea what was going on. School kids like you used to entertain themselves by bumping their knees and watching their legs stick up. You could say students like you helped discover this important reflex. You might be asking yourself, what is a reflex? Well, the reflex is when you move your body without thinking about it. When you sat down in your chair to watch this presentation, you had to think about getting into it. Compare this with touching a thumbtack or a pointy object and your hand immediately pulling away. While you definitely wanted to pull your hand away, your brain did it before you even realized it. Now let's talk about some other times you use reflexes. When you trip and fall, you'll usually put out your hands before you hit the ground. When you touch a hot plate or bowl, your hands will pull away almost immediately. Sometimes, you might even drop the bowl. When you're playing dodgeball and someone throws the ball at you, you might find yourself immediately blinking and flinching. All of these reflexes are to protect you, your body from the ground, your hand from the plate, and your eyes from the dodgeball. The knee-jerk reflex, also known as the patellar reflex, happens when the doctor hits the bottom of your knee with a hammer. It makes your lower leg kick outwards. The area the doctor hits with the hammer is called the patellar tendon, and it connects the two parts of your knee. To explain how the reflex works, we first need to define some important terms. To start off, you probably know that our bodies are made of these tiny little cells that keep us alive. Some cells are special, and they're called neurons. A neuron is a special cell that can talk to other cells and carry messages throughout our bodies. These messages are called action potentials, which can be thought of as runners that run along the cells and pass messages from one to another. Scientists call the knee-jerk reflex the monosynaptic reflex. The monosynaptic reflex uses neurons to send these runner messages from the muscles to the spinal cord and then back to the muscles without help from the brain. We call the path of the neurons that the runner messages go through a reflex arc. Now I know what you're thinking. How does all of this work? Think about it like this. If you've ever played a game of telephone where everyone carries a message from one person to another, that's just what your neurons are doing with the messages, which are called action potentials. When a neuron transfers a message to another neuron, it's like when one person whispers the message to another person. The area, the small gap between the two neurons, is called the synapse. The reflex is called monosynaptic. That word sounds like monosynapse. We can say that mono means one, which means this reflex has one synapse, or one gap between the two neurons. When you play telephone, you probably play with more than two people, and our body's reflexes usually have more than two neurons. But this reflex is special because it only has two neurons and one synapse. These two neurons playing the game of telephone for the monosynaptic reflex are called the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. In the reflex, the sensory neuron senses the information from the hammer and then sends the runner messenger through the spine to the motor neuron, which receives the information and transfers it to your leg muscle, making you kick. You can see the difference here between the two neurons and the information that they send. Now, let's connect all of the parts together to figure out how the knee-jerk reflex works. We can picture this process like a relay race, with the action potential, or information, being the runner with a baton and the runners being the track. When the doctor hits your knee with a reflex hammer, it'll stretch a muscle called the quadricep muscle. This will tell the sensory neuron runners to begin their race. The runners from the sensory neuron carry the baton through the spinal cord and then pass it off to the motor neuron. The motor neuron runners run across the motor neuron and go into your leg muscle, which makes your leg kick forward. Here's a picture of the reflex arc we talked about with the sensory neuron and the motor neuron, our muscle and spinal cord. Like when only two people play telephone, the game goes really fast. With only two neurons delivering the message, the reflex is really fast. It would take much longer if they had to send the message to your brain and you had to think about it. And that's how the knee-jerk reflex works. So when the doctor hits your knee, remember, they're starting the action potential relay race. As part of your checkup at the doctor, your knee reflex will be tested. Since they do this every year, your doctor can compare how your knee reacted this year to how it reacted last year. Studies show that as you get older, your knee reflex will actually decline and respond less. If your knee reflex isn't working, it means something's wrong with your neuron track or your reflex arc, and the doctor will investigate to make sure that you're happy and healthy. It looks like Sarah's reflex is working just fine. Thanks for learning with us, guys.